Okay, this is going to be a WWE versus TNA versus Ring of Honor 2005 pay-per-view rewind for all three promotions. So yeah, this is the first time I've ever done this. So I've said it before. I think this is the year to do it. I think 2005. You could really argue for either promotion. I think this is the only year that you could really argue three ways. I think every single promotion here out of these three was really good. I mean, look, a lot of people would say that 2005 is definitely the height of TNA in terms of the in-ring action, not necessarily in terms of the popularity and in terms of the ratings or even promos, but I think everybody looks back at TNA in 2005 like, this is the height of the X Division. This is the height of the talent in the ring. The same thing with Ring of Honor in 2005. I think you just had a lot of guys, still in their prime. Everybody was there, from Punk to Danielson to Joe to Aries to Roderick. Obviously Jamie Gibson, elevated the year for ROH. I've stated it over and over again. I've always felt like, 2005 was their best year, which I think you could argue. You could definitely argue against that now. I think 2006. 2007. I think those, you could definitely argue that those were better years for ROH than 2005. But in terms of the WWE in 2005, I guess the question I would ask you is 2005 the best year in WWE history? I think you could argue that, but it will be tough though. I think you got to remember, I'm trying to put myself back in 2005. I think when you go back to especially the end, if you go back to the end of 2005, there was a lot of people that were very, down on the WWE. There was a lot of people that were really pushing the idea that, TNA is the superior product, that the WWE is outdated and, to shell of its former self. Even Christian, alluded to it in his promo, at Genesis, that, the WWE was really, I think they really had a rough stretch. I think the Cena push, turned off a lot of people. I think, let's start with WWE first. I think the argument against WWE in 2005 is, a lot of the guys that they were pushing are some of these brand new guys, from Snitsky to Heidenreich, to Luther Reigns. Like a lot of this shit just didn't pan out that well. Even Chris Masters and Carlito, a lot of people were kind of cold on them. And obviously, I think the most criticism they took was just, with Cena just being a little bit watered down, a little bit forced to the masses. I think that was the biggest problem in terms of why people didn't really like the WWE. I mean, like, even when you look at Armageddon 2005, it feels a little bit underwhelming, to end that year. I think it was a good show, but it's something was just kind of like missing, I think, from that show. But aside from that, I think it's a pretty damn good year. I think in terms of, the wrestling, the talent, it's really the last year where we got like everybody, in their prime. I mean, it really is. I mean, when you look at what Eddie did some incredible stuff. Benoit was still, in his prime. You got the Angle and Michaels dream match. Kurt Angle really had a much better year in terms of health and in terms of, finding it, in terms of, elevating himself into the wrestling machine. So you definitely had like a lot of talent that definitely had either one last good run, like Jericho, before he took some time off, or, Christian really finding himself. Cena and Batista became household names. Randy kind of backtracked a little bit, but, you could definitely argue that he found it, once he got drafted over to SmackDown in the fall of 2005 and, ended the year pretty nicely against The Undertaker. So definitely, I think WWE has some highs and lows. I think the brand only pay-per-views were a little bit of a struggle, especially for the SmackDown brand. I think, when Raw moved to the USA Network, I think a lot of people were definitely a little bit cold, the certain parts of the roster. I think SmackDown definitely, got better, after the draft. But, some of the highs were, I think the biggest highs is that the pay-per-views, the big pay-per-views were, you had Raw and SmackDown combining, felt huge. I think they all pretty much delivered, in some form or fashion. And I think the draft was exciting. I think that when you look at the draft, it's one of the more exciting things in WWE history. Vince wanted to make it very private and very surprising. Just the way it was executed, with Cena being the first one drafted and Batista being the last one drafted over the SmackDown. It was one of the more unforgettable, months in WWE history. There's no doubt about it. So, look, I think WWE did have a good year. I mean, a lot of people would say that this is the last great year in WWE history. I could see why a lot of people do say that. It's a year that definitely does have some flaws. But I think if you were to ask me what's the worst part about the WWE in 2005, I just think a lot of the pushes just really didn't pan out. I think from Masters to Carlito, to Heidenreich, to Snitsky, just a lot of stuff just fell flat. I think in 2005. But you definitely had some, breakout stars like Shelton Benjamin. I think Shelton's push, it felt like he was going to be the next big thing. It's easy to say that. And then they gave us some exciting stuff. I think the draft was extremely exciting. And then, they gave us some nice surprises. I think Edge and Edge and Matt Hardy, the feud, just the way they brought Matt Hardy back, was a huge shot of life. I felt like that was kind of, I feel like they kind of went against the grain and did something fresh and exciting there by bringing Matt back. And, even ECW One Night Stand. I mean, I didn't really count the ECW One Night Stand in terms of, helping the WWE out from the match quality standpoint. But even that was just something really fresh. And it just stuck with you. Even the promos on that show, when you look back on that, it was definitely, it was definitely an exciting month. The draft and ECW One Night Stand that whole month. And then you cap it off with Vengeance, the best brand only pay-per-view ever. I mean, it was, they definitely had like an awesome, year, at least going into, SummerSlam. I think after SummerSlam, I think the year kind of, fell off a little bit, but the quality was still there. So definitely, I think some of the guys that they tried to push, definitely did not work. So that you got to use that against it. And then on top of that, I think Cena was very polarizing. I think a lot of people were a little bit, baffled at Cena's push in terms of, it not working at the time and, them just kind of forcing it and sticking to it, which ultimately you could argue was the right call. But at the same time, you feel like it definitely did turn a lot of people off. But overall, I think when you look back on it, I think 2005, in terms of talent, in terms of the wrestling, in terms of just overall, fan enjoyment, it's definitely one of the best years I think we've had in WWE history. In 2005, look, it's just a great run, for the X division. I think when you're looking at AJ, you're looking at Daniels, and when Joe came into the equation, and even some of the other X division talents like Shelley, Sabin, Petey Williams, Matt Bentley, Sanjay Dutt. It's just an incredible core that they had. I think the year definitely got better. I think they had a little bit of everything. I think the concepts definitely worked in 2005, from the Ultimate X to the Six Sides of Steel, the six-sided ring, the King of the Mountain. All these innovative concepts I think really did work. I think the tag division was hit or miss. It felt like they peaked in the beginning of the year. But AMW, Team Canada, and the Naturals, I think it was a solid core to work with. I just don't know if they really, reached their potential, especially as the year went on. There was just a lot of stuff that I think fell flat. Bringing in like, Sabu and Rhino, and you had to mix it up with guys like Abyss and Raven. It definitely felt like the ECW guys had a shot of life. I definitely think that added to the company in 2005. So by the end of the year, I just think you had a nice little variety show. Bringing in some of the Ring of Honor guys, I think could have been better handled. I think a lot of the guys like Austin Aries and Roderick Strong, they felt like they were kind of just there to audition or try out. I think, they probably could have been a little bit better utilized. But at the same time, I think if you were a diehard ROH fan, to lose them and for them to be TNA exclusive at that time, I think, especially losing Roderick Strong, that would have been a huge blow for Ring of Honor. So, that definitely worked out, I think, for the better, like when you look back at that. But, yeah, I mean, look, I think the way they used Joe, was phenomenal. I think the year got better as it went on. You could definitely feel the company really get into a rhythm in the summertime. And then I think by the time Christian came in, it just felt like the company got bigger and hotter. And I think, you just had growth, from beginning to end. You just had growth. And I think the idea of Dusty being the booker, I think it was very polarizing at first, but I think, once they made the transition to Scott D'Amore, it felt like they were clicking on all cylinders, by the time you get to the end of the year. So definitely, I think the X Division stuff was, by far the highlight. And then you could definitely feel growth within the brand and the roster, in multiple aspects. I remember my brother said to me, like, you really were only cared about, the X Division stuff, but it seems like you're watching more and more of the complete shows now. And he was right. I think that this show has definitely had something for everybody, when you get to the end of that year. So in terms of Ring of Honor in 2005, what really made the year good is I think everybody was there. They worked the stuff over with TNA. I mean, you got to see AJ, make some rare appearances. Daniels, became a main part of the roster again. So, AJ and Daniels coming back, I think that definitely, helped out the depth of ROH. The first half of the year, it's really a transition with seeing if Aries can hold the championship and kind of maintain the prestige that Joe had with it, which I think he did. I definitely think he did, but I don't know if Aries really, won everybody over. I think the reaction to in the match with Punk is proof of that. But still, I think when everybody looks back on it, you really can't complain about Aries' work ethic in terms of, trying to maintain the prestige of the title, because he was going above and beyond in terms of traveling, in terms of title defenses, and the match quality was definitely still there. And even if you listen to the commentary, they were very clear that Aries was on a much better pace than Samoa Joe in terms of quality and quantity of title defenses. So yeah, I definitely think they had a good year. I think when you go back to May in 2005, they had one of the best triple shots that they ever put on with Manhattan Mayhem, Final Showdown, and Nowhere to Run. I think the summer of Punk, it's still, like, no matter how you feel about Punk, I think you have to admit at the time it was one of the more creative and one of the more mind-blowing just swerves in pro wrestling history. And it showed you the versatility of Punk, that he can play the monster babyface with Jimmy Rave, and then he could go and play the devil, the heel of the century, during the summer of Punk. And then the farewell was just really icing on the cake. I thought that stuff was great. And then you bring back Bryan Danielson. Punk leaves the company, then you bring in Danielson. Joe is, more of a TNA guy by the time you get to 2005, but still, like, they still, found a way to give Joe some really, really big, matches and feuds, whether it be Kobashi, whether it be Jay Lethal. And, I still think Joe just had, in 2005, he was really part of, everything. He was still like the most essential part of the roster, even though he lost the championship. Him being involved, elevated and still drew for the company. And I think that's the most fascinating thing about it. But, they gave Danielson a chance at the end, and, they put, everything into Danielson, which was great. I think it was definitely the right call. I think at the time it probably didn't seem like it was, going to be a home run at first because everybody had questions about Danielson's charisma and, whether he could, do what Joe did for the title. But ultimately, he ended up surpassing it. But in '05, I don't think you really knew that yet. I think there's three different phases. You have the Aries phase, you have the Punk phase, and then you have the Danielson phase, with Joe being the mainstay. So that's definitely good stuff. The match quality was great. I mean, look, but when you're looking at who dominated this list, I think Ring of Honor. They're still running more shows than WWE and TNA. Not every single show is huge, and not every single show is a pay-per-view. So it's really kind of unfair to judge, the match quality because you're running so much more shows. But still, I think when you're looking at the match quality from this year, there were so many great matches. I mean, there really was. I mean, when you're looking at what Joe did, when you're looking at Danielson's matches, and then when you're looking at what Punk did during the Summer of Punk, what Gibson did, there's definitely some of the best matches in ROH history in 2005. So I think in terms of quality and depth, you can't really complain about the match quality. It's definitely there if you look above and beyond. So I'm trying to think. All right, so that's good stuff. Everything about Ring of Honor was good in terms of the talent, the wrestling, obviously the promos. Punk, still being with the company, gave you some must-see promos. I think Gibson really did a good job with some promos. Even Daniels, definitely elevated the brand with his promo ability and his mic skills and his theater background. But I'm trying to think. All right, so if you want to argue against Ring of Honor in 2005, I think maybe you might be able to argue that it's a little bit, weird how guys are coming in and guys are leaving. Especially the situation with the TNA guys. It felt like they were just kind of used as special attractions. So you could take that away from it. I think if you're looking at the championship, maybe it feels like there's not enough consistency and not enough of a constant with the championship kind of flip flopping, and you had guys that had won the belt like James Gibson that were leaving and going to WWE. So that might be the other argument. Maybe too many guys leaving. Like maybe if Punk had a longer reign and Gibson had a longer reign, you would look back at the year like there was a little bit more consistency. Maybe too many guys just leaving. But I thought that my argument to that is you were able to do some nice creative things, to combat that. And I think the way Gibson lost the belt to Danielson, was pure class, and it really did still feel like a quality match that delivered and a good passing of the torch moment. But I would say that if you were to ask me what's the one thing holding 2005 back from Ring of Honor, it's definitely not talent. It's not talent. You could argue that it's too many guys, coming in and too many guys leaving. You could definitely argue that. But I would say that the biggest knock against Ring of Honor in 2005, I think it's the tournaments. I think anytime they tried to run a tournament, I just think it fell flat. Like when you go back to the Trios tournament, and then you go to the Best of the Super Juniors tournament, which was there was definitely some politics there with New Japan. I remember the Dragon Soldier B stuff did not go over that well. So I think some of the tournaments kind of fell flat. And then when you get to Survival of the Fittest, I think it was okay. It wasn't a worthy follow-up to 2004, especially the finals. I think Roderick winning, was definitely the right call. I mean, the match was still good, but I think when you look at, the tournament and to actually qualify, and you look at the show as a whole, it just never really felt like Ring of Honor was able to find it in terms of trying to, find this marquee tournament. It never really took off. Obviously, Survival of the Fittest, ended up being their thing, but it ended up being one of those tournaments that had a reputation of really not delivering. So I think you could really hold that against ROH. But I'm just going to give it to you now. If I could pick one promotion out of the three, WWE, TNA, and ROH in 2005, which one would you take? Man, it is really, really difficult. I'd have to go with Ring of Honor. I'm sorry if that sounds like a boring answer, and I'm trying not to be biased, but I would just have to. I just remember being very frustrated by WWE at the end of '05, and that's the only reason why. If you were to ask me, like until SummerSlam, I might go with WWE. I really might. I love what TNA did in 2005. I really do love it. I think it was an awesome year. It really was. But I think what really holds it back for me, I just think they were relying on too many guys past their prime, number one. And, there's just a lot of stuff that in the tag division, especially, even the 3 Live Crew stuff, guys like Billy Gunn, guys like the Road Dogg, Jesse James, even some of the stuff with Conan. And when you're bringing in DDP and then you're bringing in, Nash, who had no... you couldn't rely on Nash, and you couldn't rely on Waltman to show up. So I think a lot of that stuff really did cost TNA. I really do. But in terms of the X division, flawless, fucking flawless. The whole year, it really was. So I'm gonna have to give it up to Ring of Honor. I think you could really argue that so many guys contributed to the quality this year. There's like 4 or 5 or 6 different guys that could really win the MVP, all from Ring of Honor. And, I think that's my biggest reason as to why I think ROH was the best promotion of 2005. But yeah, I mean, let me know what you guys thought was the best promotion in 2005 out of these 3. Just try not to be biased. I know it's tough, but, try to just look at this thing, with a straight face, because look, I know the ROH stuff is not as accessible for everybody, but when we're talking about a lot of these guys, everybody here ended up being like a household name. Everybody on this MVP list, I think, became a legit household name. So yeah, let me know who you guys think was the best promotion of '05. You have 3 choices. If you only had to pick one, it's the toughest one. I mean, look, if we were to do this for 2006, it wouldn't be a debate. If we were to do this for 2002, it wouldn't be a debate. If you did this even for 2010, it would not be a debate. But for 2005, it's the only year where I think it's debatable. Okay, here it is. This is the MVP list. So top MVPs for 2005. We have all 3 promotions combined. I've said it time and time again. I think the most difficult MVP race, to narrow it down, and maybe the history we've ever had, at least in the United States. At number 20, I'm going to go with Triple H. All right, so you got to give Triple H credit. I think he did a lot of stuff. At the beginning of the year to build up Batista. I think he really drove the storylines leading into WrestleMania. He got the standing ovation at Vengeance. He took a lot of time off, and then he came back to feud with Flair. But overall, I think in terms of promos and especially a lot of the gimmick matches delivering, I think Triple H had a pretty good year. And this was really the end of his, reign in 2005. So give him credit. He, barely gets on the list, though. He just edges out Jericho for the number 20 spot. At number 19, I'm going to go with Christian. I think Christian had a great year, man. I think the promos were good. He was entertaining. He got himself over. He was able to kind of separate himself from Trish and really find his own, persona to get to the next level. Him dishing it out with Tomko with the battle raps on Cena was definitely something good. We've talked about it and harped on it over and over again. Even though Christian had momentum, he was reluctant, to sign a WWE contract. Did it have to do with Vince? Did it have to do with Jericho? Who knows? I think he really wanted to elevate his worth by going over the TNA, and he goes over the TNA at Genesis, and it was a huge moment for TNA. I think it was a huge shift, in terms of TNA cashing in. You lose Eddie Guerrero that day. Christian goes to TNA. It was a huge, gift for TNA. For the WWE to lose Eddie and for TNA to gain Christian. So I got Christian at number 19. At number 18, we have Rey Mysterio. Mysterio just had a really good year. He was able to introduce us to Dominic and him and Eddie Guerrero. It's a very polarizing feud. I think the matches were frustrating at times, but I think when you look back on them, it's really the last, great stuff that Eddie Guerrero was a part of. Storyline wise, the custody of Dominic, I'm your poppy now, or I'm your father now. There's a lot of stuff there that, a lot of people did not like, but there's a lot of good stuff that came from it as well. I guess the I'm your poppy, t-shirt would definitely be one of them. But, what's cool about it is you could definitely see Dominic's, Eddie Guerrero's influence on Dominic today with the way he looks and his presentation. So, but Eddie and Ray, they tore it up the whole year. But if you want to find, honestly, I think the ladder match with Dominic, it's definitely everything that the feud was building to. So you want to give that credit. But if some of the matches that they had on SmackDown, I will recommend checking out if you haven't seen them yet. Check out the one from June 23rd. In the Ring is probably the best work that Eddie and Ray had done together all year. And number 17, Jesus Christ, I'm going to have to go with Bryan Danielson. I can't believe he's this friggin' low. So the only reason why Danielson is this low, I wasn't crazy about the feud with Homicide. I really wasn't. I think a couple of those matches towards the end of the series were good. The lumberjack match was good. The steel cage match, it was a memorable way to end the feud with the airplane spin. But he comes up short against Aries at Nowhere to Run, and then he quits the company. He spends the summertime in Europe, and then he gets better. He almost comes back a little bit clean cut. And it's a little bit more of a classy approach to wrestling, where it's a very safe style. It's a very smart style. And then he wins the belt from James Gibson. And yeah, give Danielson credit. I think the end of this 2005 for Danielson was remarkable. You had the Roger Classics. He was even able to get great matches out of guys that were kind of past their prime. And, he was able to go out with a bang against Marufuji at Final Battle 2005, which was great stuff. At number 16, I'm going to go with Edge, the rated R superstar. I think Edge he had a great year. This is really Edge's year as a heel. he was the most hated guy at One Night Stand. He won the first ever Money in the Bank. He was running with, he was able to run with Lita. He cheated. He was able to get Lita to cheat on Matt. And they ran with this, and they pushed the envelope, and it was just cutting edge. Everything about this was must-see TV. I think Edge became a sex symbol. He became a star. I think the promos got better. I think Vince, really loved, the way Edge was able to, mock Matt Hardy and some of the evil facial expressions. I think this is the year where Vince fell in love with Edge. So I got Edge at number 16. At number 15, I'm going to go with the Rabbit Wolverine, Chris Benoit. I think 05 it's really Benoit's last great year. So yeah, he was great in multi-man matches. I thought he helped the match of New Year's Revolution become one of the best elimination chambers that we've ever had. I think, he was in the match almost the whole way, and he was awesome in that match. And then he was great at Money in the Bank. Some of the best selling we saw all year, was Benoit did in that match, especially, with the chair shot from Edge. It was, monumental selling. He still put his body on the line. He already had the laceration on top of his forehead, which got busted open. So his performance in the multi-man matches were great. Then he had the feud with Booker T at the end of the year. They rekindled the best of 7 series with, Benoit trying to come down from a 0-3 deficit to get back into the game. I thought that was great stuff. But yeah, if you haven't seen it yet, Benoit had some really good television matches this year that might go a little bit under the radar. He had the SummerSlam rematch with Randy Orton right before SummerSlam in Toronto, same venue. So he got the rematch there, which was on SmackDown, which was great stuff. The Pick Your Poison match with Triple H, one of the best matches he ever had with Triple H on the Pick Your Poison Raw, where Triple H and Batista were allowed to pick, the opponents. Batista chose Benoit. I believe Triple H chose Kane. I would have reviewed that if that was still up on Peacock or Netflix, but they don't have it up right now. Benoit had some good television matches with Edge, with Christian, even with Jericho. They had the regular match on Raw where Jericho won with a small package, and then Benoit got the win back in Japan, which was actually a submission match. So could go on and on. You know, Benoit had an incredible year, I thought, for the most part. The only thing disappointing about it was the Eddie match at One Night Stand, and then the Orlando Jordan stuff fell flat. But, you know, the SummerSlam opener with OJ was definitely, a memorable way to start SummerSlam. But, I think one of the highlights from Benoit is I think he had a tables match, I think, with Edge. I could be wrong about this. And he ended up losing. And then he got like one of the biggest standing ovations he ever got. I think that was on Raw, like right before One Night Stand. I think it was. I think it was like a tables match with Edge. So definitely check that out. Number 14, I'm going to go with the Monster Abyss. I mean, Abyss was just great. I mean, you put him in gimmick matches, whether it's lockdown, whether it's barbed wire matches, you know, even the stuff he did in Ring of Honor, you know, is why he's so high on this list. You know, he really helped out the Embassy in the Generation Next feud and just had some, you know, just moments of just greatness. You know, Black Hole Slamming Matt Sydal, and, you know, some of the stuff that he did with, Roderick in the Steel Cage was great. So I got Abyss at number 14. I guess the highlight will be, stealing the show with AJ at Lockdown. And he was great in multi-man matches like King of the Mountains or Steel Cage Warfares. And number 13, we're going to go with John Cena. This is where John Cena becomes a household name. This is where he wins his first championship at WrestleMania. He has the rap album out. He gets drafted to Raw. He becomes the face of the company. And it was a struggle. It was definitely a struggle. But Cena definitely still needed to work in the ring with his moveset. But in terms of, his conditioning, his cardio, his effort in the ring, I still think it was a pretty good year for Cena. I think the matches always got great reactions. They got more polarizing as the year went on. But I would definitely say, the highlight for Cena in 2005 is just being drafted to Raw. It was definitely one of the best moments. He does the battle rap with Christian and puts Christian in his place. And, him and Jericho go at it for months leading up to SummerSlam. And, Angle really gave Cena a tough time in the fall of 2005. But obviously he was able to survive that as well. Number 12, we're going to go with Eddie Guerrero. Rest in peace to Eddie. You're always going to remember that this is the year that Eddie Guerrero died. But just like, the late, great Tupac Shakur, Eddie was able to do some of the best work right before he died, in terms of promos, in terms of storytelling, in terms of, being a great heel. I thought Eddie did a wonderful job. Say what you want about the actual storyline. I think Eddie did some incredible work as a heel, not necessarily on the mic, but just his demeanor, the entrance music. I love the fact that Eddie slowed down his entrance music. I just thought it made for a great heel. Obviously Eddie was going through some ups and downs, and, there were moments here where Eddie just wasn't himself. The match against Benoit, One Night Stand, is definitely proof of that. But then there'd be other moments where Eddie was just better than ever, against Rey Mysterio, for example, or even Kurt Angle, for example, in Chicago, where, Eddie and Angle probably had their best match together, which was back on SmackDown in April of 2005. So I got Eddie at number 12. At number 11, I got the Animal Batista. Batista was just unstoppable this year. I think, in the ring, I think Batista was fine. I think the key to Batista's success in 2005 was, he got over, he was able to earn everybody's respect. He got into a really good rhythm in the ring. He definitely had a cool factor, and he was able to pretty much stay healthy until the end of the year. There might have been some nagging injuries leading into Survivor Series, but he was able to get through the whole year, and he was able to maintain the rhythm that he was in over the SmackDown, and it worked out really well. I was at the house show when Batista, was feuding with Triple H, leading up to WrestleMania, and he was the most over guy in the building. It was unbelievable, and he deserves a lot of credit for WrestleMania 21 being as successful as it was. So I got Batista at number 11. At number 10, we got Roderick Strong. Obviously, Roderick was definitely an MVP candidate, for Ring of Honor. Like, he won the MVP match against James Gibson. So obviously, a lot of people were pushing him to be the ROH MVP. But I will put him number 10 in terms of overall when we're looking at WWE, TNA, and ROH combined. Well, look, there's really not a lot of interesting things I could tell you that Roderick did from a promo standpoint or from a personality standpoint. I think the most interesting thing I could tell you is he started dating, Jade Chung, during the Embassy feud with, Generation Next. you know, so he was pretty much able to get Jade, to align with Generation X, for that blow off match. But that's really all I could tell you about Roderick. I mean, the stuff that he did in TNA, was pretty good. I mean, look, he had one of the better matches at Bound for Glory. He was able to mix it up with Austin Aries a little bit, but I don't think Roderick ever felt comfortable in TNA, but in ROH, this is where he was at home. I mean, he had some really good tag matches with Jack Evans, where he tagged up with Jack Evans. And then I think when you get to the summertime, I think, Punk really did a good job of elevating Roderick. He was in some big time matches with Punk. They even made it event at a New York show, during the summer of Punk. And, he was able to defeat Matt Hardy. I think that was a big highlight for him. He was able to win Survival of the Fittest. And then he was able to win the MVP match against James Gibson. He had a better match with Gibson than I think Danielson had with Gibson. So I think that's like your biggest case, for Roderick. Winning Survival of the Fittest, I think was the right call. I think if you're trying to groom a young breakout star that's on the way up, I think that's, where it goes. And, was able to win the tag team titles with Aries at the end of the year. He was great in the Steel Cage Warfare match against, all those matches against the Embassy. I thought he did really well as like, in the enforcer role, those Generation Next matches. But, to me, the highlight is the Danielson stuff. I think the matches he had with Danielson are still, some of the best matches in ROH history. I think they had creative finishes. I think when you're looking at Roderick in 2005, he was just very, very well built. He was very strong, very forceful. He just, execution wise, I don't know if he ever, recaptured, this type of, force and, precise, with his execution and his offense. There was just something very violent about it. But yeah, I mean, it was awesome. I mean, he dished it out. He gave Danielson the most punishment I've ever seen him take. I mean, you just look at Danielson's chest. It was just beating the red meat. And, that Vendetta match, it just, I don't know if anyone has suffered, through that much before, while stealing a victory like Bryan Danielson did. So, obviously the highlight is the Vendetta match against Bryan Danielson, which easily could have been, the match of the year. At number 9, I'm going to go with Shelton Benjamin. I think what Shelton did in 2005, was unbelievable. I don't know if Shelton ever, recaptured this type of magic. I mean, you say to yourself, I mean, when you're looking at what Shelton did, which is very well documented, but if you look at, what he did in the spring, when you look at Money in the Bank, then you look at, stealing the show with Jericho at Backlash, and then you look at, the match that he had with Shawn in the Gold Rush tournament. It was just such a good run. And even before then, I think, winning the Intercontinental Championship and, having a good run with that, I think, Shelton, brought a level of athleticism, the pro wrestling that, I think we hadn't seen in a while. And I think it was definitely eye-opening. I think it inspired a lot of young black kids to want to get into wrestling. Even a guy like Swerve, I think Shelton was definitely eye-opening, for a lot of black kids growing up to say, like, yeah, I could do that. And, I want to be like Shelton Benjamin. It's almost like I want to be like Mike by the way he's able to leap and use his quickness and his vertical jumping and how he was able to just wow people with, climbing up the ladders or, selling that super kick from Shawn Michaels, which was, maybe the best ending to a match ever. But for some reason, it just felt like, they wanted to push him down the card and to see if he could ever, bounce back. It almost felt like it was a test. I don't know what the fuck happened here. Maybe they just didn't want to pay him. Maybe Shelton was due like a big bonus, for keeping the Intercontinental Championship past 6 months. It just felt like once they, once they kind of downplayed his success, it just doesn't feel like he was able to get back to where he was. And but hey, for as far as Shelton fell, after this year, I'll always look back at one of the reasons why WWE was so good in 2005 was because Shelton gave us some just incredible moments. At number 8, I'm going to go with James Gibson. Obviously, Jamie Noble ended up getting fired by WWE at the end of 2004. I believe it had something to do with health insurance. He wanted to take out a health insurance claim, and for whatever the reason, WWE was not on board with it. That might have been one of the reasons. And then you heard other things that this just might have been like saving money, roster cuts. I think this is around the time when they let go of Spike Dudley as well. But, the bottom line is end of 2004, James Gibson has to do something, to provide for his family. And, Ring of Honor gave him the platform to, get his passion back for professional wrestling. And he just went on a great run this year. I mean, you name it, show after show, match after match. Even against mid-carders, against main eventers, against whoever, every single show, Gibson was having one of the best matches on a lot of these shows, whether it's Spanky, whether it's BJ Whitmer, whether it's, Roderick Strong. I mean, you name it. Gibson was, creating a buzz and getting standing ovations after each and every match. And then, he came up short against Aries for the belt a couple times, but, he finally was able to do it at Redemption. And, he was able to put over Bryan Danielson. The bridge to Bryan Danielson is key. The fact that, the guy that won the belt between Punk and Danielson ended up being Gibson, was the perfect guy. I think of the perfect guy, for Danielson to have a nice, clean, safe match against. And on the way out, he puts over Roderick Strong like $1 million. So, most people would say that James Gibson, day in and day out, was the MVP of 2005. I mean, look, even though he went to the WWE and didn't finish the year, besides Roderick, like a lot of the other guys that are in contention to be the MVP weren't as committed, to Ring of Honor as much as James Gibson. Danielson was only there for, a certain part of the year. Punk was only there until the summertime, but, Gibson really, day in and day out, he scratched and clawed, and he finally found his way, to the Ring of Honor World Title. So I think Gibson's run in Ring of Honor, it's always going to be one of the best, feel good stories. Eddie Guerrero, it gets compared to Eddie Guerrero a lot, but it's on a different level though. I think Eddie's run was a lot of different, promotions and a lot of different, independent wrestling, appearances. It was only a few Ring of Honor appearances, but Gibson really became, a central part of the storylines day in and day out. And that's, I think, the biggest difference compared to, Eddie Guerrero's comeback as well. Obviously, when Gibson came back to the WWE, you really don't remember it that much. He's always had a job within the WWE since then, but obviously it wasn't as climatic as Eddie Guerrero winning the title or anything like that. At number 7, we're gonna go with the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels in 2005. Yeah, 2005 is probably, like, from start to finish, Shawn's best year, since 1996. I think it really was. He was Shawn Michaels and Kurt Angle. Exceeded everybody's expectations. I think everybody knew it was going to be good. But did you think it was going to be that good to the point where it's, doing that kind of numbers in terms of the buys and, getting this type of recognition in terms of the matches? I just don't know if you thought it was going to be that good. I think the feud with Edge was pretty good at the beginning of the year. I think, the initial match with Edge was a little bit of a feel out process, but then he had some really good stuff, on Raw. I think the street fight with Edge was great. Even the matches against Shelton, the match against Shelton was definitely the best TV match of the year. So you give him credit. I think he elevated guys, like a Chris Masters, that you didn't necessarily expect. He was able to work with, Cena in the triple threat and put him over very nicely. He worked really well, and carried he really did a good job of carrying the Raw versus SmackDown match, at Survivor Series. So yeah, even if you take away the angle stuff, I think Shawn did some really, really good stuff this year. But I think the highlight of Shawn Michaels in 2005 is the temporary heel turn. So, I just think that the stuff that Shawn did with Hogan was I think this really puts it over the top as one of Shawn's best years, as obviously as a heel, and for him to really dig as deep as he did the Hogan, it's really, really fascinating, because it really did seem like Shawn and Hogan were on good terms. It seemed like everything was cool at first, but the decision to have Shawn turn heel and not to go the babyface versus babyface route, it felt like it just awoken the beast in the Shawn Michaels, and it really did feel like he really was able to capture a lot of the frustrations that he felt like when he was initially in the WWE, about how a lot of people just didn't think he was able to be champion, and Hogan is the cornerstone of the company, and there's just no way to really conquer that milestone of actually, dethroning and being on the same level as someone as Hogan. So I think everything came into play here, and you got to see, the real Shawn Michaels come out, and it just resulted in some of the most entertaining promos. And obviously Hogan felt a certain way about it, and he felt like Shawn went in the business for himself, and he wasn't cool with a lot of stuff, and Hogan was acting like a dick, and but hey, I think it was a lot of fun. I think it made. It really made the summer, and it made it one of the most enjoyable, pay-per-views ever. I think everybody, that watched SummerSlam and watched the video package was generally exciting to see it. And look, and give Hogan credit too. He was able to hang with Michaels and have one last great match. And this is where Hogan should have ended it. He should have called it a career here. He should have just counted his money and rode off into the sunset instead of ruining his legacy the way he's done. But Shawn, always look back at some of these Shawn Michaels promos with very fondly, especially the one in Montreal, which is a little bit more centered around Brett. But, they were able to tie it in with the Hogan stuff, too. So every single thing about this was great. So I got Shawn Michaels at number 7, not just because of the stuff he did in the ring. I think in the ring at 40 years old, he's still arguably the best worker in the WWE. But I think what really sets Shawn apart in 2005 is, you finally got him back as a heel, at least for 1 month, and it just resulted in some of the most entertaining promos that we've ever gotten. Okay, at number 6, I got Christopher Daniels. I mean, the easiest thing to say about Daniels is, the X Division title reign. At the time, it was the longest X Division title reign. I think when you look back on it, it's probably one of the best reigns in TNA history. I mean, you could really argue that it was better than a lot of the world title reigns. I mean, what would you say is like the closest like NWA or TNA title reign that could eclipse what Daniels did here? I just think it was great stuff. Obviously the match quality is going to be great, especially when he's in there with AJ. And, he was even able to have, some meaningful title matches with some of the lesser known guys like, Sabin, Bentley, Primetime, Petey Williams. The match against Aries, I think that could have been a better showcase. But I think Daniels deserves a ton of credit, not just for the in-ring work, but for the mic work. He really kind of carried a lot of the microphone work, especially even the stuff with AJ. AJ was a little bit more closer to Roderick Strong in terms of mic skills, and Daniels with his degree in theater and his acting skills, and just the way he embraced being Mr. TNA, that his heart pumps TNA blood. I feel like he really embraced it. And I just think this is the most motivated we've ever seen Daniels, and it resulted in just a great year. And then aside from that, I think the initial return to Ring of Honor was great. I think it had some juice behind it. I think when you look at Daniels in 2005, I think the stuff he did with Punk, when he came back. And the show ended with the hot return, was a huge moment. They followed it up with a 1 hour draw. with him and Punk going at it, which was good, but it wasn't great. And then he was able to feud with Joe at the end of the year in TNA and ROH. And then he had the big babyface turn, at Genesis, and then the big comeback at Turning Point. So it's definitely Christopher Daniels' best year, from what I've seen in terms of the match quality, in terms of the promos, and just him being in his prime. I mean, he's a lot older than some of the guys he's in the ring with, but you can't say that he was a step behind anybody. He was just as good as anybody from the X division. So I got Christopher Daniels, well deserved. Proud to say that he's at number 6. It would have been really cool to put Daniels at number 1. I mean, it really would have. I actually thought about it, but the fact that Daniels is above guys like Michaels and Gibson, who are pretty much synonymous with being the MVP of 2005, I think it's a credit to how good Daniels was this year. Okay, now we're on to the top 5. Very, very difficult to rank the top 5, but I'm going to go with CM Punk at number 5. I think it's funny. I don't really know if Punk's name comes up as an MVP, for Ring of Honor in 2005. It doesn't come up as much as some of the other guys. I've seen some people, name it around. They actually named an award after CM Punk called the MVP award on the message board back in the day. But I think, I think Punk made a huge impact. Even if you weren't watching Ring of Honor, he did create a lot of buzz in terms of, coming into the WWE. You heard reports that there was mixed feelings about him, especially from Triple H and Shawn Michaels. Even if you weren't watching Ring of Honor, that news actually penetrated to the masses. So I think he made a huge impact. I think he was able to capitalize on the momentum that he gave Ring of Honor in 2004 with, the trilogy with Joe. I think it got 5 stars, obviously, but it kind of carried over into the next year. I mean, you could see him getting into better physical condition. He changed his ring attire. He changed his look somewhat. Had possibly the feud of the year in Ring of Honor with Jimmy Rave. And then, I think the summertime thing, I think it was huge. I think the weird thing about it is, it's just funny how many people bought into it. And I think what's a little bit, unique about it is the flexibility that Punk had, to not just be forced to leave right away, but to actually finish up his dates. I guess, WWE actually gave him the green light to finish up, whatever dates he committed to. So the way they pulled it off, I thought was genius. And it's still I don't think this gets enough credit in terms of being one of the most creative things, Ring of Honor had ever done. I think it's, even going back and watching it on DVD years later, it still holds up really well. It still feels just incredible. But I think it was probably very difficult, at the time to fully grasp it and live in it. But if somehow, some way, you were able to make all those shows and didn't have to really wait for the DVDs to come out. I mean, that had to be a hell of a ride. It had to be just such a fun ride, what they took you on there. And I just think, the way it was executed, the guy that he chose to put over was perfect. And, just the celebration and the aftermath at the last show was just, yeah, I mean, it just felt like one of the more emotional, farewells that we've ever seen. And it's funny, man. I think everybody at the time, seemed like they really embraced, him leaving the company. And I think everyone really gave him the credit and the respect that he deserved at the time. So, look, I think looking back on it, it was, just icing on the cake for an incredible run, that he had with the company. So definitely, I still think it's Punk's best year. I know some people would, debate that maybe had better years in the WWE. Maybe he might have had better feuds, even before 2005, if you want to put in some of the other stuff that he did, even before he got to Ring of Honor. But, to me, I'm always going to look back at this whole run like it was the best, some of the best work of his career, no doubt about it. And then at number 4, we're going to go with Austin Aries, the wrestling machine. It's funny, before Joey Styles called Angle the wrestling machine, someone actually had a signature on a message board called Austin Aries, the wrestling machine. But look, I think what Aries did, I think, the decision to put the belt on him, I thought it was great. I think, that is the ideal example of putting the title on someone that's hot and, fresh. And, the way it was just done, was awesome. So I think the momentum, carried into 2005. And I think he definitely, elevated the prestige of the title. It seemed like he busted. I mean, it's hard to follow Joe. It definitely is hard to follow Joe. Like, he didn't surpass what Joe did. But in terms of effort, in terms of, putting in the mileage and, forcing himself to live up to the expectations, I think he surpassed, the expectations. I think the matches were good. I think everything, all the title matches were great. The rematch with Joe was great. The big match with Shelley delivered. Even the non-title stuff with Low-Key, really delivered. I mean, you could go on and on. I mean, the Gibson matches, were almost classic level. And, the way he dropped it to Punk, the Punk matchup was just fresh. And, I think Aries and Punk really delivered, a great way to end Aries' title reign. I really think it was great. So, and then obviously, he put the tag titles, back on the map. I think what him and Strong did for the tag titles, building up to that tag team title victory, was another milestone for the company. I think that was huge. The feud with the Embassy, obviously that delivered. So you want to give Aries credit for that, for captaining, the ship, for that whole feud. But I think the underrated part about it is, I think Aries got great exposure in TNA. Even though some of the matches were just kind of showcases or, there were non-title matches that just, didn't feel that important. The Daniels match, just definitely felt like a showcase. The Roderick match definitely felt like a tryout match. But, when he was in that Elimination X match, it felt like he was a vital part of the X division at that time. And yeah, I mean, look, he didn't have any crazy, wacky gimmick in 2005. He just wrestled as himself in TNA. So I think even more so than Strong, I think Aries' exposure in TNA, definitely boosts, his credibility for the year. So I got Austin Aries at number 4, probably the most controversial pick out of all of these names. I think Aries in that spot is probably higher than a lot of people would have envisioned. And then at number 3, we got to go with Kurt Angle, the Olympic gold medalist. 2005 for Kurt. It's definitely, is it his best year that he ever had? It's tough. I think I would say 2001 was better because he was healthy. I just think he had a better attitude in 2001. I think that helps. I think 2002, he didn't have like the cool factor that he had in 2005, but I think in 2002, he was probably a little bit more athletic, a little bit healthier. So I think that helps the year for him. But in 2005, it's the complete transformation of Kurt. Whatever goofiness and whatever, weird shit was going on with Kurt that would make him a dork or, make him this goofy son of a bitch or whatever you want to call him. I just felt like a lot of that stuff wasn't there anymore. I just felt like he got in better physical condition. He was more intense. He was more vicious. He was just hungry. He was really, he just felt like he was angry, angry to really capitalize and get back to that top spot. It just felt like the burden of trying to get back was kind of bothering him. And he took his frustration out by just having killer matches. And, obviously him and Shawn delivered, the whole trilogy delivered. He was kind of booked into some weird things. You could definitely tell a little bit frustrated that he was forced to put Cena over before WrestleMania. I think the stuff with Booker T and his wife, I think he tried to make a bad, the best out of a bad situation. No doubt about it. Even being, forced to wrestle Eugene was a little bit weird. But definitely, I think the highlight from Kurt in 2005, aside from the HBK stuff, was I think he brought new life in the Raw. I think Kurt Angle going to Raw, it definitely felt huge. It felt like a huge acquisition. It felt like someone coming into, from a different company and just elevating the brand. I definitely think he was like the most interesting part of Raw. I think he made it feel fresh. Obviously, he was forced to wrestle Cena again. But yeah, I think he definitely did make the best of it. I think, the argument against Angle, from a behind the scenes standpoint, was that he wasn't, an effective heel, as Triple H once pointed out. But, I just think Angle, he's such a competitor and he's such an athlete that it was just difficult, not to get behind him, especially when you see, how watered down, Cena was. But ultimately, I think Kurt had an amazing year. It's really like his last full year in the WWE, where he was somewhat healthy. I understand, like he was definitely in a lot of pain the whole year, but he was able to get through the whole year. And definitely, I think more so than any other, wrestler or superstar ever, I think the switch from SmackDown to Raw or from Raw to SmackDown, any other guy that switched, it felt like it brought new life, to the brand extension. And I think that's the most important thing about Kurt Angle, in 2005. And then at number 2, we're going to go with Samoa Joe. I always thought one of the coolest things about Joe in 2005, especially for Ring of Honor, was, he stayed. I think, it was very difficult, to follow, Joe being champion. I think had he left the company, it would have been a huge blow. But I think the fact that Joe, was definitely a player the whole year. Like, he didn't take a back seat. He still, made each and every show. He still helped the company, keep drawing. So yeah, it's one of the few championship reigns where I think the guy, not leaving the company and staying, paid a huge deal. And I think Ring of Honor definitely benefited from it, because a lot of times, like, you see these like historic title reigns that takes the life out of guys, and they're not able to stay on the road and they're not able to stay competing. But I think Joe, in 2004 and then staying in 2005 is like the ideal example of that, of just an absolute like phenomenal title reign, and then the guy staying and playing a supporting role and then elevating the company with just, other stuff that doesn't have anything to do with the title. Elevating the prestige of the Pure title, elevating his protege, Jay Lethal, stealing the show on the best show of the year. So he deserves a lot of credit for that. And then, when he won the Pure title, I thought he definitely elevated that title, and then, passing the torch to Nigel, was huge for Nigel. So definitely give Joe credit for that. And then obviously I think the Kobashi stuff, I think that, they were always able to find, these unique situations for Joe, even away from the title that just felt important. And, obviously the big match with Kobashi was the height of that, or was the highlight of that. So definitely, even though Joe went to TNA in 2005, it definitely felt like his role in Ring of Honor didn't really change. It didn't really change for a while, at least until 2007, where you knew like that was pretty much it. But, aside from that, I think Joe going to TNA, though, I think it elevated the TNA brand. I think it took TNA to the next level. You could definitely feel, like, just by watching the shows, you could definitely feel the shows and the company just get better and obviously more competitive and more interesting, as soon as Joe came in. From Slammiversary against Sanjay Dutt all the way to winning the X Division title against AJ. Each and every month, Joe was involved in something, great. And, I think for anybody that had any sort of fear that Joe was going to be watered down in TNA, he was booked beautifully. I mean, say what you want about, obviously, TNA took a ton of criticism for the booking, over the next couple of years. But the timing, worked out perfectly for Joe. The way Joe was booked in TNA in 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, the list goes on. It took a shitload of criticism, but the one year you can't really bitch about it is 2005. He was almost used perfectly. That's how good it was. So it's tough, man. I think Joe easily could have been on the number 1 spot, but at number 1, I'm gonna have to go with AJ Styles, number 1. Just from his work in TNA alone. AJ did come back to Ring of Honor. It was the appearances were very few and far between. The first appearance was against Jimmy Rave, which was, a match to build. to the Styles Clash match at Glory by Honor 4. So, he had the first match with Jimmy Rave in February, and then he came back for good against Petey Williams at Death Before Dishonor 3 in June. Then he had the big attraction with Roderick at Fate of an Angel, which was AJ's best match in Ring of Honor that year. And then I think he came back for the the Embassy match at Vendetta. So yeah, man, it was cool to see AJ back. Yeah, and then he beat Jimmy Rave in the Styles Clash match at Glory by Honor 4, which was a little bit weird. It wasn't a home run, but the story for AJ being number one is his role in TNA. Look, in terms of mic skills, in terms of character development, I think AJ had a long way to go, which is one of the biggest reasons why Christian, going to TNA was huge for the company. He was able to help guys like AJ. But in terms of just AJ, I think in 2005 it's the first full year where you could look to AJ just having that green light on a 3-hour pay-per-view each and every month. And each and every month, he pretty much knocked it out of the park. He stole the show at Final Resolution in the Ultimate X. He had the classic match with Daniels at Against All Odds, the Iron Man match, where, he retained the title in overtime. You could definitely argue that he stole the show at Destination X. Even though the booking of that match was weird, it got Daniels over to the next level. And, Daniels and AJ, say what you want about the weirdness of the booking there, but, they tore it up in the Ultimate X part of that match. He stole the show at Lockdown against Abyss. He won the NWA title from Jarrett at Hard Justice, thanks to Tito Ortiz as a special guest referee. Defended the belt at Slammiversary, ended up losing in the King of the Mountain, but it was another great performance, and it was still the match of the night. And, AJ was still able to make a gimmick that was a little bit polarizing work. So you give him credit for that. He had another phenomenal match against Sean Waltman. Maybe the best match that, X-Pac has had in years. Had No Surrender. And then he goes out there with Joe and, he puts over Joe in the Ultimate X Cup, which was the match of the night. And then obviously he has the match of the year at Unbreakable in the 3-way where he wins the X Division title back. And then he beats Daniels in the Iron Man match once again at Bound for Glory right before the clock expires. Definitely the best match at Bound for Glory. I still think you could argue it as the best Bound for Glory match from a technical standpoint. The only weak link, I think, the only time I think AJ did not have the match of the pay-per-view was against Petey Williams at Genesis, but it was still a good match. Look, it's hard to say that that's better than the Elimination X match, which stole the show, but him and Petey definitely went out there and busted their ass. And then obviously him and Joe, had one of the best TNA matches of all time at Turning Point, where Joe finally wins the X Division title to start that historic reign. So yeah, each and every month, AJ was phenomenal. I mean, it's because of him. Look, if you take AJ Styles away from this company, do they get the television deal with Spike TV? Do they, get all these? Do they get the 3-hour pay-per-view spot? Do they get all these different things that come? With all these different perks that came with the company, like the video games and all that stuff, I'm going to say no. I think, this is, look, AJ was never Ring of Honor champion. He was a huge part of Ring of Honor, but he never had the role for ROH that Punk or Joe did. But look, he took TNA, almost single-handedly. This dude was Mr. TNA. This is the real house, that AJ Styles built. And, it was great to see him at Slammiversary. Look, it's disappointing that he didn't wrestle. It looked like he was going to touch on having one more match in TNA, but he was really just there to, put over Leon Slater and just say that the X Division is in good hands. I really wanted to support AJ and support Slammiversary, but it seems like that pay-per-view got a lot of criticism with the NXT situation, but it's not over yet. We'll see what they do at Bound for Glory. You always want to see AJ be, have one last part of the TNA brand, and that will be a great way for him to go out. But I don't think you could debate about this. I think 2005, what AJ did for this company was incredible. So I got to go with AJ at number one. This is a very difficult MVP race. I think this is the best one. I think, from 1 to 20, you're talking about an all-time great worker in each and every spot. So if I were to say this, what ranking do I think is going to get the most criticism out of all of these rankings? I would say that Danielson at 17. Oh man, that seems a little bit low for Danielson. I think what cost him a higher spot, I think he probably took, he took a lot of time off. So I would say that's probably why. Shelton Benjamin at number 9, that might seem a little bit high to people. Shawn Michaels at 7, that might be a little bit low for some people. Punk at number 5, that might seem a little bit high because, Punk missed a lot of the year. A lot of the year was in OVW. So I'm not going to, classify his OVW stuff into this equation. So you could definitely argue that. But I just think what Punk did there was so exciting during the summertime. I think Aries at 4 will be a tough sell for some people. I think Angle at 3 is fine. I definitely think Joe is more than deserving of being, the top spot, or definitely in the top 2, top 3, top 2. Jericho, I think Jericho's probably the biggest omission, from this list. I really wanted to fit Jericho in. Even though Jericho had one foot out the door and was burned out, he still had some good matches. He still did some really good work. So hope everybody enjoyed the list, and we can move on to the next phase of the video. Okay, this is going to be the top 25 shows of 2005. All right, starting it off at number 25, we're going to go with Backlash. I would say Backlash ended up being one of the better Raw pay-per-views. I think it's good. It's like not quite great, but it's almost like right there. I think Jericho and Shelton was a hot opener. I think, Batista Triple H was a solid follow-up to WrestleMania. Edge and Benoit had a really good last man standing match. You had some fun stuff with Hogan and Shawn teaming up. Christian cut a great promo on John Cena, which was a lot of fun. I think Vince was even involved there. So yeah, I think Backlash, one of the better brand only pay-per-views. Number 24, we have Punk, The Final Chapter. I think it's a must-see show. I think it's one of the most emotional, farewells ever. I think everyone needs to see it just for CM Punk's entrance. And there was even some really good stuff on the show. I think, the Samoa Joe tag match with Low Ki, was an incredible experience. At number 23, we have Unforgiven. Another really, really good Raw pay-per-view. It really felt like a different brand, being Triple H free. Angle and Cena, the two SmackDown legends, come over and main event a Raw pay-per-view. You have, Matt Hardy and Edge stealing the show in the steel cage match. But yeah, a really fun show. I think Shawn Michaels' performance of the year against Chris Masters was pretty damn good. At number 22, we have Lockdown. Every single match inside of the steel cage. This is the first ever Lockdown. I think everything was good. I think, there's some really solid stuff on here that's not quite great. Like Daniel's X Division title match, Raven and Jeff Hardy. There's definitely some good stuff on here with an incredible main event. The only thing that underperformed, I think, was Lethal Lockdown. He just didn't have the talent, to be able to pull it off there. But aside from that, I think everyone could look at Lockdown like it was better than expected. What goes under the radar here is that there's just a lot, including AJ, just a lot of people just weren't confident that they could do a pay-per-view like this and have it be successful. At number 21, we have Redemption. One of the best shows ever to take place in Dayton. Definitely the blow off to the Summer of Punk with James Gibson, Jamie Noble winning the Ring of Honor World Championship, and it ended up being a great night. You actually had some really, really fun stuff on the undercard as well. One of the highlights of the Summer of Punk. This is Redemption. Number 20, we have the Royal Rumble. The Royal Rumble event. The Rumble of the show as a whole event. It's pretty damn good. When you're looking at the card, you got Shawn Michaels and Edge. You got Undertaker, Heidenreich. You got Angle in a triple threat. You got Triple H and Randy. You really have Hall of Fame talent in matches that each and every match got a lot of time. So it's a really consistently solid but not great undercard. And then I think the Rumble is pretty good. It really is one of the more star-studded Royal Rumbles. I think a lot of people just nitpick about the botch at the end where they're running out for time and then Vince tears his quads. So I think there's somewhat of a negative stench that kind of holds this show back from getting praised, but it's still like from start to finish, it's one of the better Rumble events. I think we've seen. And the Rumble match in terms of talent is pretty damn good. And, you know, Benoit and Eddie, you know, starts this thing off and it ends with the bang with Cena and Batista, you know, going back and forth, which is a little bit, you know, weird, but at least you got a winner though. I think the right guy won in Dave Batista. And yeah, I think the show is pretty damn good. It's probably one of the highlights of 2005 in terms of like an overall show. At number 19, we have TNA's Sacrifice from August. Oh yeah, I mean it's pretty awesome. I mean it's a loaded card. I think the card looks better on paper than it actually is. But you know, Joe and AJ steal the show. You get a dream match of Austin Aries and Christopher Daniels. You know, the tag match is very ECW driven. You even had some really good stuff that you forget about, like Jerry Lynn and Sean Waltman, which was really good. So yeah, Sacrifice is definitely, I would say, one of the better TNA pay-per-views of 2005. At number 18, we have Final Resolution. I'm not crazy about the Final Resolution undercard. I think there's a huge stretch of this show that's piss poor, but it's got a really good triple main event. You had two of the best matches of the year back-to-back in the Ultimate X and the tag match. And then Monty Brown comes up short. But it's a fun match. It's a fun experience to see Monty and Jeff go at it in the main event. Number 17, we have the Final Showdown. The Final Showdown, it's more of a complete show than Redemption. It's not as memorable, but, you know, Final Showdown, you get the blow-off to the Homicide and Bryan Danielson feud inside of the cage where Danielson spins Homicide around 100 times. You got a definitive winner in Austin Aries and James Gibson. And it's just a solid show from start to finish. You got a little bit of comedy. You got Alex Shelley and Roderick actually opening up the show. So that's the Final Showdown. One of the more complete shows in Ring of Honor history in terms of depth and quality. And it's part of one of the best triple shots ever in Ring of Honor history too. So let me make that clear. At number 16, we're going to go with Judgment Day. The SmackDown brand only pay-per-view of the year. You had John Cena coming off of the rap album. You know, to main event Judgment Day against Bradshaw in the I Quit match. You know, Angle and Booker was a little bit controversial in terms of the build-up, but that was fun, even though it had a crappy finish. You know, you had Chavo and Paul London going at it, which was surprisingly really, really good. And you know, what was the other show stealer? Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio. The feud gets taken up a notch to the next level. Even though you get a DQ finish, it's probably the best work they had done together all year. At number 15, we have Vendetta. We have Roderick Strong and Bryan Danielson, you know, putting on, you know, which might have been, you know, Danielson's best match during his whole reign, at least for this first year. I mean, it really was that good. So Danielson and Roderick just have a war in the main event. That makes it must-see. On top of that, you got the best Samoa Joe and, you know, Christopher Daniels match in Ring of Honor. You got a Generation Next versus Embassy main event with AJ Styles where Daisy Hayes turns heel and the Embassy wins the war there. So it's a good show. Really, really good show. That's Vendetta from Chicago. Number 14, we have Death Before Dishonor 3. Really, you know, with Death Before Dishonor 3, Punk and Aries, it's an incredible main event. You know, the promo that Punk cuts, obviously it's must see. You get Christopher Daniels' return. You know, the whole show is really just about setting up Punk's big farewell, you know, showing all the clips and, you know, Punk on alternate commentary. I mean, it's a really big swerve if you weren't keeping up with the dirt sheets. You know, besides the main event, I you know, there's really not a lot to remember about this show. You did have AJ Styles coming back from TNA against Petey Williams, which was definitely cool to see. You know, Joe defends the Pure title against Colt Cabana. So it's definitely a fun show with just an unforgettable main event and maybe the best promo and aftermath in Ring of Honor history. So obviously it makes a must-see. At number 13, we have Bound for Glory. Well, I mean, look, I think Bound for Glory, it's a little bit underwhelming. I think if you judge the show like from a star rating standpoint and you look at like the main event, it's a little bit weird of a show to kind of say, oh, like this doesn't feel like it's the best Bound for Glory, but I think it's good. I think it's a nice little variety show. I think it gave you a little bit of everything. You know, not everything went that smoothly tonight. You know, there's a little bit of controversy about, you know, the Battle Royal and, you know, the Ultimate X falling down. There's you know, a lot of stuff didn't go well tonight, but It gave you great depth, it gave you great variety, from Joe and Liger to the Monsters Ball to the Iron Man match. And it had a feel good ending, with Rhino, triumphing over Jarrett. So yeah, it's fun as hell. It's a fun show. It definitely, I think TNA did a good job of making it feel like it was their biggest show of the year. At number 12, we have Survivor Series. It's a good Survivor Series. I know the Raw versus SmackDown shit, it doesn't age well for everybody. Still, I think the main event did deliver. It got you excited for Randy Orton and Undertaker. Taker's return, was just very well done. I think the card, just had great depth, from Benoit and Booker, to another just brutal Flair and Triple H match. And then you had Angle and Cena, which is a little bit overbooked, and it's frustrating. It was frustrating to watch at the time, but looking back on it, I could definitely appreciate the environment. It's definitely like a very heated, it's the most heated, I think, John Cena environment, up to that point. At number 11, we're going to go with No Surrender, 2005 from TNA. This is in July of 2005. This just felt like they finally delivered a complete card. You had 3 to 4 to 5 matches that you could argue are on the 4-star level. Joe steals the show against Sabin. You had AJ Styles and Sean Waltman, having a great match. Daniels had one of his best X Division title matches against Petey Williams. And then you had Raven, defeating Abyss in a dog collar match to end the show. So yeah, you just had great depth there. That's No Surrender 2005. Probably the most complete TNA pay-per-view of the year. And number 10, we have Unforgettable. The rest of the show is forgettable except 2 matches. Definitely take out James Gibson and Roderick Strong. The MVP match, which is James Gibson's last match before he goes back to WWE. And obviously Samoa Joe and Kabashi are in an unforgettable tag match. So I got Unforgettable at number 10. And number 9, we have Fate of an Angel. Yeah, Fate of an Angel is really good. I know nothing really made the list later on when we get to, if we get to the list. Nothing made it, but it's definitely, a lot of people would say, in terms of talent, it's one of the best ROH shows ever up to that point. You got to see Kevin Steen, you got to see El Generico, during the early days. You got to see Nigel and Claudio, during the early days here. But then, you got to see AJ Styles, mix it up with Roderick. It felt like TNA's MVP versus ROH's MVP going at it. Punk and James Gibson have a very dramatic and very bloody main event. Samoa Joe and Jimmy Rave, was a solid match. Christopher Daniels and Matt Hardy, WWE versus TNA on an ROH show. So yeah, it's a loaded show. It's definitely a good show to watch. Like if you're unfamiliar with Ring of Honor, it's got a lot of ties to WWE and TNA for a lot of fans that, are a little bit, out of touch with Ring of Honor. So it's definitely a good show to start at. At number 8, we're going to go with Unbreakable. Obviously, it's got a killer, triple threat match for the X Division title. They cater to the ECW fans, and they give you Rhino and Raven, which somewhat disappoints. But other than that, I think you have more than enough stuff, to make up for it. Like Sabu and Abyss was a lot of fun. You got Aries and Strong trying to prove themselves to TNA management. You had Sabin and, Petey Williams in another competitive match right there. So it's a solid undercard with the most unforgettable, main event in TNA history at Unbreakable. On September 11th, 2005, let's not forget that the reason they call it Unbreakable is because it's a 9/11 tribute. At number 7, we're going to go with Final Battle 2005 from Edison, New Jersey. So, what the funny thing is, I played with this one guy, and he told me he only been to one Ring of Honor show in Edison. And he said the only thing he could remember about it is they threw toilet paper at Jimmy Rave. So I asked him what was the main event, and he can't remember the main event. So I don't know. It could be any show from like 2005 to 2006. Maybe even 2007. But man, if you were at Final Battle and you don't even remember what the main event was, man, I don't know. There's just something weird about that. But man, this show was awesome. You got Danielson, Marufuji, you got Kenta and Loki, bringing in the Pro Wrestling Noah guys for a double main event. I think you can't lose with that combination. So I got Final Battle 05 at number 7. Number 6, I'm going to go with Nowhere to Run. One of the best shows in Chicago history. This is like CM Punk's defining moment. I believe this is where he was able to get signed to the WWE, after this match with Jimmy Rave. It's just an incredible night for Punk. I think the way he worked the crowd, the celebration at the end, everything about it just, was proof in the pudding that he could get to the next level. You had one of the best Aries and Danielson matches on this show. There's even some other stuff that I'm leaving out, but it's a great show. It's definitely similar to Manhattan Mayhem in terms of the quality, and it's one of the best shows to ever take place in Chicago. It's probably the best show in Chicago up to that point. At number 5, we're going to go with SummerSlam. I think SummerSlam was great. I think this is the SummerSlam. This is like the closest feeling I ever got to 2002, in terms of the card. I mean, some of the matches here, didn't really get a chance to deliver or just felt a little bit incomplete. But the bottom line is, I think Hogan and Shawn, really gave us a good main event because of the build-up. I think the match was better than anybody could have ever envisioned. I think this is a perfect show, for the casual fan. Definitely. And from a wrestling standpoint, I think Orton and Undertaker was solid. I think, you could definitely see Angle really morphing into an evil personality at this time. I think Jericho and Cena, was a fun environment. It was the first time the fans had ever really turned on Cena. Batista gets a big victory in his hometown over Bradshaw, which, was not the plan. I'm glad that they went with that over the Muhammad Hassan stuff. And I think, from a wrestling standpoint or from a match quality standpoint, I think Eddie and Ray, definitely stole the show, even though there's definitely some flaws, in that match as well. But, SummerSlam was a complete show, complete show, a lot of fun. It was, to me, like, it was definitely like the end of the, pay-per-view party era for me. I think the parties never felt the same. After SummerSlam 2005, and for some reason, like I always forget the pay-per-view themes after SummerSlam 2005. This is like the end of the road of in terms of like remembering, a lot of the themes. And number 4, we're going to go with Turning Point. I think Turning Point was definitely dope. They gave you the barbed wire massacre with Sabu and Abyss to start the show. You had Aries and Strong in a tag match. You had AJ. And Samoa Joe, that they probably had their best match. Rhino and Jarrett, definitely delivered in the main event. Jarrett wins the belt back. Christian actually makes his TNA debut in the ring against Monty Brown. It's definitely a good show. I think there's definitely some bad moments on here though. I think it's definitely like TNA's most popular pay-per-view of the year, like from start to finish. It actually did win TNA Pay-Per-View of the Year in a lot of the forums. But still, like, for as good as it is, it's hard to say that it's an absolute, like, home run. It's still, like, not as good as, like, like an amazing, like, AEW Pay-Per-View, if that makes any sense. And number 3, we have WrestleMania 21. I think WrestleMania 21 is really, really good. I think the only thing that really holds this back, most people would say that the double main event, the 2 title matches really hold WrestleMania 21 back. I think when you look back on it, I think Batista and Triple H it's good. It's not a bad WrestleMania main event. It obviously it's nowhere near like the match of the night or anything like that, but it's still like a satisfying way to end the show. I think the only thing you could really bitch about is JBL and Cena, but still, it's not like they stunk out the joint. It wasn't like a bad match. It just felt like it wasn't, their best effort. Maybe it didn't get enough time, or maybe it was just unsatisfying, whatever the case may be. But, the silver lining was I thought it really put over the FU as like a killer finisher, and I think Cena's still riding the wave today. For as many fucking people that have kicked out of the FU, it still feels like an effective finisher. But yeah, I mean, the first half of WrestleMania 21, I mean, they gave you matches that we wanted to see. They gave you innovative concepts that actually worked for the time. So I got to say, WrestleMania 21, it's still like one of the better WrestleManias ever. I still think it's, I would actually put it like in the top 5, maybe top 10. You know, it's easily in the top 10. It's arguably in the top 5. So that's how good WrestleMania 21 is. I think the important thing is the roster for WrestleMania at this time is probably at an all-time high. And that's why I think you still have to put it, you know, as high as it is. And number 2, we're going to go with Vengeance. I mean, look, Vengeance is just a killer show. I mean, it really, really is. I'm not crazy about the Shelton stuff on this show. I think it was a little bit botched. You know, I think Edge and Kane, you know, was really, really good, actually. And then the triple main event is just amazing. You know, we got 2 championship matches on a Raw brand pay-per-view. And, you know, I just think we had a lot of guys were just, you know, really at the top of their game. I think the Angle Michaels rematch, it's more of a treat than people remember. I think at the time, I was shocked that we were going to get a rematch. And once we got it, I was just like, man, this is too good to be true. And then, you know, Triple H and Batista, they finally got the green light to deliver. I think Cena, Jericho, and Christian, the triple threat scenario, it definitely felt hot. It felt fresh. It felt exciting. And number 1, we're going to go with Manhattan Mayhem. You know, it definitely became like the standard, you know, for Ring of Honor shows. It felt complete. Every single match was good to like great. You know, it had so much depth to it. I mean, you could really have fun and argue what's the match of the night. You could really argue 4 or 5 different ways. I would go with Samoa Joe and Jay Lethal, but, you know, you can make the case that it's Austin Aries and Alex Shelley. You can make a case that it's the main event, which is, you know, Low-Key and Homicide crashing the party in an impromptu tag match with Joe and Lethal. You could argue that it's CM Punk and Jimmy Rave in the dog collar match. You could argue that it's, you know, BJ Whitmer and... you know, BJ Whitmer and Jimmy Jacobs against, you know, Roderick Strong and Jack Evans. I mean, you know, you could even argue that it's Nigel and Cabana. You could argue that it's, you know, James Gibson against Tiger Mask. So it's really a great show. I think it really sold me on Ring of Honor. Like I had seen like certain matches before Mayhem, but this is the first show where I just said, holy shit, like, this just felt so complete. From start to finish, it just blew me away. So I think they've definitely topped Manhattan Mayhem. I think they topped it in 2006, and you know they definitely did top it. But I think for some reason I've always kind of used Manhattan Mayhem as like the benchmark. I think when Evolve finally had like a great show, I think I stated, you know, this Evolve is like the best Evolve show since Manhattan Mayhem. I can't even remember which one it was, but yeah, those are the top 25 shows. I think I pretty much got everything. I really can't see there being any arguing about leaving out any shows, but hope you guys enjoyed the list. I got Manhattan Mayhem at 1. I got Backlash at 25. I think that pretty much covered all the bases. Okay, so this is going to be the top 30 matches of 2005. Very difficult list. I thought this was very difficult to, you know, actually choose the number 1. It was very difficult, but I was able to get it done. All right, so a couple things before we get going. My rule for this list was I only wanted to use one combination once. You know, there's a lot of great combinations in 2005. Kurt Angle and Shawn Michaels. I only wanted to pick one of their matches. AJ Styles and Samoa Joe. That was actually the toughest. It was really tough to choose between their sacrifice match and their turning point match. And what was the other combination? Christopher Daniels and AJ Styles. You know, they had 2 great matches this year. You can only pick one of them just to make the list a little bit more of a variety show. So that's pretty much it, man. You know what? I'm going to go through a lot of the stuff that I cut here before we get going. I had about 40 matches that were in contention, and I narrowed it down to 30. So what did I cut? The first match I cut was Bryan Danielson and Austin Aries from Nowhere to Run, arguably their best singles match. I cut the King of the Mountain from Slammiversary from 2005, which I thought was good. That was one that Raven won. I thought that was good. I think I like that match more than most people, though. I cut Roderick Strong and AJ Styles from Fate of an Angel. You know, AJ's best Ring of Honor match of 2005, definitely. CM Punk and James Gibson from Fate of an Angel, which was really good. I cut Samoa Joe and Jay Lethal versus Homicide and Low-Ki from Punk, the Final Chapter. Probably the best Ring of Honor match ever to end in a DQ. It really is something to see. It's more of an ECW style match, but it was still awesome. I really wanted to fit that in too. All right, so what else did I cut here? I cut Flair and Triple H from Taboo Tuesday. Obviously, it's a great match. It really is good stuff. I actually cut John Cena, Kurt Angle, and Shawn Michaels from Taboo Tuesday as well. I love that match. I just couldn't fit it in. So a lot of you guys that hate that match will be, glad that I left it off. What else did I cut? Sabu and Abyss from Turning Point, the barbed wire match. Yeah, I thought that was good. I just didn't think it was match of the year. Like a lot of people said that it was, but it was. I was able to fit Sabu on this list anyway, so that's good. I feel good about that. Danielson and Marufuji, I thought that really, man, I wish I was able to fit that in. I actually cut Benoit and Booker T from Armageddon. Look, it was great. It was still good stuff. I just couldn't fit it in. And I think that's about it. So let's get right into the list. Okay, at number 30, I got Austin Aries taking on James Gibson. This is actually from Stalemate. I just thought this was the better match. I actually chose this one over Final Showdown, but, you got two smaller guys going at it here. It's a stalemate finish. It's like a double pin, but, the work until you get to that finish is incredible. I think up to that point, the most eye-opening performance of Gibson's tenure in Ring of Honor. Number 29, we have the Elimination X match from Genesis. You had Daniels and Joe teaming up to take on Saban's team. Lots of great X Division talent. It felt like a Survivor Series elimination match, but the highlight would be, just Samoa Joe's beatdown on Christopher Daniels. It was just something to remember there. That was a November to remember moment for me. Number 28, we have Eddie Guerrero taking on Rey Mysterio from SummerSlam, the ladder match for the custody of Dominic. It was tough to pick. An Eddie Guerrero-Rey Mysterio match. I don't think this is their best work together. I don't even think it's like the best representation of what they can do in 2005. There's just so much extracurricular stuff with Dominic and the wives and the social worker that I think took away from the match for me. But it's still a great ladder match. It still definitely had some moments despite Eddie's temper tantrum. Well, 20 years of Dominic Mysterio. The whole feud was really, leading up to this match. So, Rey Mysterio does go over. He maintains the custody of Dominic. 20 years later, Dominic is still doing his thing. So I got to put that at number 28. At number 27, we have the Monsters Ball 2. We have Sabu, Abyss, Rhino, and Jeff Hardy from Bound for Glory. Just an incredible ECW-style Monsters Ball match. Lots of great spots. Lots of great hardcore action. From Jeff Hardy to Sabu to Abyss to Rhino. Just really exciting stuff. It only goes under 15 minutes, too, but it really is probably the highlight from Bound for Glory. The first Bound for Glory. Number 26, we have Samoa Joe and Chris Sabin from No Surrender. Samoa Joe steals the show at a TNA pay-per-view. I think when you go back and you watch this match and go back to that time, I think everybody would have said to themselves, wow, Joe and TNA, they're really doing a good job of booking him. And, Sabin was the perfect opponent for him because he had never really touched Sabin yet. So they stole the show at No Surrender. Just incredibly exciting stuff. At number 25, we have Shelton Benjamin and Chris Jericho stealing the show from the opener of Backlash. Definitely, this 24 hours for Shelton Benjamin was the highlight of his career still so far. The back-to-back incredible matches with Jericho and Michaels, but the one from Backlash, the creativity out of the walls of Jericho was just insane. Just mind-blowing athleticism from Shelton Benjamin. Number 24, we have CM Punk taking on Jimmy Rave. This is the steel cage match from Nowhere to Run. Just an incredible feud. Punk went through hell here, and he gets the victory in Chicago, the steel cage match. There's just some incredible moments here. I think Prince Nana, what's underrated about this, I think Prince Nana really played his role very nicely to elevate this match. But yeah, Punk finally goes over Jimmy Rave, who is a good villain, man. I think Rave is really a good heel. So I want to mention this now before I forget about it. But if there's anybody that reminded me of Jimmy Rave from like a movie, you know, I can't remember the actor's name, but if anyone saw Dirty Harry with Clint Eastwood, the bad guy in that movie, the guy that hijacks the school bus, if anyone saw the movie, like he probably reminds me more of Jimmy Rave than any other like movie villain. All right, number 23, we have Matt Hardy taking on Edge. This is from Unforgiven, the steel cage match. Yeah, I mean, look, Matt Hardy finally gets his revenge. The crowd was hot for Matt. In the steel cage match, he gets his revenge on Lita. Just a really nice little payoff after their SummerSlam match. At number 22, we have Team Canada taking on America's Most Wanted. This is from Final Resolution. The beginning of the year, I just thought this was the height of what TNA gave us in the tag division. It was just really exciting stuff. America's Most Wanted, Harris and Storm win the tag team titles in just a venture ride of a tag team match. And number 21, we have John Cena and JBL. This is the I Quit match. Yeah, you know, Cena, JBL, I Quit. I think they redeemed themselves from WrestleMania. You could just tell they were really motivated to make up for the lack of time and, you know, the lack of execution at WrestleMania. And I think everything about this was just awesome. Until you get to the finish, I think the finish could have been better, you know, handled. But, Cena got bloody as hell. JBL took, did some incredible trash talking. It was just, you got to appreciate this match for just how, fluid it was. There was really not a lot of lag. I mean, it was pretty damn good. The sense of urgency was incredible. I think Cena felt a lot of pressure. I think JBL was frustrated. And the result is just a really good action-packed I Quit match. Number 20, we have Samoa Joe taking on Jay Lethal from Manhattan Mayhem. They steal the show on what many people consider the best Ring of Honor show for years, the standard of Ring of Honor shows at Manhattan Mayhem. At number 19, we have James Gibson taking on Bryan Danielson. This is from Glory by Honor 4. This is where Bryan Danielson comes back from his vacation and wins the Ring of Honor World title from James Gibson. So this is where it all starts for Bryan Danielson. The game of human chess. It's a very healthy, it's a very safe but smartly wrestled, match from Bryan Danielson. The highlight would be, Gibson is going back to WWE, but Bryan Danielson gets on the mic and says, he's like, I'm here to be the Ring of Honor champion. I will not go to WWE. I will not go to TNA. I will stay here and defend this title like a man. So I thought that was awesome. But just the very start of the Bryan Danielson title reign. But, when you watch that match, Danielson just came a long way, in terms of just everything, in terms of his style, in terms of promos, in terms of just, comfort on the mic and everything. So number 18, we have Kabashi teaming up with Homicide. The Odd Pairing, taking on Low Key and Samoa Joe from Unforgettable. So, they wanted to do pro wrestling Noah tradition there with a junior teaming up with a heavyweight, and the results are great. I thought this was awesome stuff. I thought Low Key really came to play. It really captured the magical feeling that Joe and Kabashi gave New York City, and it was able to translate very well in Philadelphia. So the tag match definitely does hold up. That's all I can really say about it, but definitely go check it out. Number 17, we have Generation Next taking on the Embassy, the Steel Cage Warfare. So yeah, Generation Next gets their revenge on Prince Nana and the Embassy. Jade Chung gets her revenge as well. You almost forget about Jade Chung stepping on Jimmy Rave as payback, but obviously Jack Evans steals the show. But aside from that, I thought everybody delivered, from Abyss to Matt Sydal. Jimmy Rave was in there the whole match. Even Shelley definitely had some nice revenge moments on Austin Aries. So a lot of stuff really, was blown off here. But obviously, everyone's going to remember Jack Evans for, killing himself on some of these bumps. It was still good. I think it had a tough time, following the Jack Evans elimination. But, Strong and Aries, ganging up on Prince Nana for the ending. It's a little bit. It has a little bit of a feel good ending. So I think the match is awesome. It definitely is. And I think Basketball City is the perfect venue for it because I'm not a huge fan of that venue, but it was perfect for the steel cage because it just had so much space. At number 16, we have Shawn Michaels and Shelton Benjamin. This is the Gold Rush tournament. This is just a treat out of nowhere. Like when Shawn Michaels, came out, it was a surprise, and JR just really sold it well. He's like, "Oh, this is gonna be awesome," and it really was. I mean, it's the most like entertaining finish ever. Even before you get to the finish, it just Shawn Michaels just turned 60. The sexy boy is 60, and at this time, he still feels like he's a young man. He's not even 40 yet, and he goes out there and delivers with the world-class athlete. The fans in the front row's reaction to the finish, keep an eye on that if you ever see it again. So I got Shawn and Shelton from the Gold Rush tournament at number 16. It's funny, no one even remembers like the finals to the Gold Rush tournament. This is what they remember more than anything because it was that good. At number 15, we have Batista and Triple H from Vengeance to Hell in a Cell. We have Batista and Triple H finally emptying the tank and giving us a bloody war inside Hell in a Cell. If you have the DVD, Triple H gets the standing ovation. There's a nice little celebration with Batista where it's like a passing of the torch moment. It's an awesome show. Definitely the end of the Triple H Reign of Terror era. So definitely check it out. Number 14, we have the Elimination Chamber from New Year's Revolution. Speaking of Batista, this match is all about setting up Batista for the big babyface turn. Triple H decides not to help Batista. You know, the evolution stuff at the end, it was a little bit frustrating, I think, for some people. But in terms of the action, you had everything here. You had Edge and Shawn Michaels, setting the tone for their feud. Benoit and Jericho, work their asses off. You just had some great creativity. You had some really just awesome, spots here out of the German suplexes, the flying headbutt, the RKO. Out of the sharpshooter. I mean, you could go on and on. Triple H busted his ass this whole match. And Batista was just over like Rover. That's really all you can say about it. It's good. I mean, it still holds up. I think it's one of the best Elimination Chambers. I think Shawn really, added some star power to the match. They really didn't dwell on the Shawn stuff. The only one that it really affected was Edge. You would think because of how Triple H sold the Shawn Michaels special guest referee, appearance that it would have played into this, but it didn't really play into it at all. But number 13, we have Austin Aries taking on CM Punk, Death Before Dishonor 3. Just really an incredible. I think what everyone can take away from this Aries and Punk match is just how quickly you could turn the crowd. They go from treating Punk like he's a god to treating Punk like he's the devil in the flip of a dime, in the flip of a promo. And then you have the Christopher Daniels big return. I mean, everything about this is awesome. I think the work is underrated too. I mean, it's definitely one of the best crowds ever for a Ring of Honor match. I mean, the fans just really wanted to see Punk win the title, and the work is good too. The work that Punk and Aries did from a ring psychology standpoint. Working over Aries' neck, and the no selling of all the big moves from Punk, where he no-sells the 450 and he no-sells the Pepsi plunge. I thought those were definitely great moments. But Punk wins the Ring of Honor World title finally to set the tone for the summer of Punk. But he does not leave. He stays and, wants to take the title to the WWE to start this whole adventure of the summer of Punk. At number 12, we have CM Punk taking on Samoa Joe, Christopher Daniels, and James Gibson. This is the Fatal 4-Way elimination match from Redemption. This is where Punk finally drops the belt to James Gibson, and after it's over, Punk, gives James Gibson a hug, and the most emotional title victory still in the history of Ring of Honor. It was just, it was awesome. I think Redemption is definitely the best show they had ever done for, from Dayton, Ohio. I mean, look, Dayton was a huge market for Ring of Honor, and they probably did run better shows, like from top to bottom. But I think when you look at this main event and you look at the aftermath, there's no way you can tell me that they ran a more memorable show in Dayton, then Redemption. It's probably the highlight of the Summer of Punk. It really is. But I would say that the two highlights are Death Before Dishonor 3 and Redemption. Number 11, we have the Money in the Bank ladder match from WrestleMania 21. Still, I think this is still the best Money in the Bank ladder match. You just forget how much Shelton Benjamin wowed people here. I mean, Shelton was awesome, but you had Shelton, Jericho, Christian, Kane, Edge. Chris Benoit does the best selling of the whole decade here. Edge wins the Money in the Bank, but everybody played their role nicely. It's more than just spots, though. I think this, what this ladder match really proved to me is, if you want the ladder match to go over the top, you have to be more than just a ladder match guy. And I think that's what all these guys can do. These guys are great wrestlers. Everybody in this match knows how to work. And there's just other stuff than just ladder bumps that really made this match work. And I think that's why. I think, Benoit's selling, even Christian's strategy, Kane is the dark horse, Edge is the opportunist. There's just so many different things that still make this match special. Number 10, we have AJ Styles taking on Abyss. This is from Lockdown, the first main event to the first ever Lockdown. AJ and Abyss, set the tone. I don't know if they ever, top this match in the history of Lockdown. It's that good. Number 9, we have AJ Styles and Samoa Joe. This is for the X Division title from Turning Point. Joe takes the X Division title. And yeah, it's really, really awesome stuff. The AJ and Samoa Joe matches in TNA were just incredibly stiff. I mean, they were just friggin' awesome. Even the beginning of this match, you just didn't know how AJ was going to survive some of Samoa Joe's kicks. Joe kicks out of the Styles Clash, which at the time, like nobody could believe it. But it was really difficult to pick between this match and the Sacrifice match. I think the Sacrifice match was a little bit tighter. And you could definitely make the argument either way. This was the toughest choice I had, like picking between, the two same wrestlers, in terms of which match it was going to be. I just thought I had the toughest time with this one. But yeah, I'm going to go with the Turning Point match. It's a little bit more memorable because this is the start of Samoa Joe's X Division reign, and then you had Daniels coming out and ruining the party for him to get his revenge. So it's definitely great stuff. Number 8, we have James Gibson taking on Roderick Strong. This is from Unforgettable, the MVP match. It's great stuff. I mean, Gibson went out with a bang. He saved his best match for last, and Roderick does go over, and just the way Gibson puts over Strong as the MVP. I mean, he really did a good job of putting over Ring of Honor on the way out. That Roderick is going to set the tone. He's passing the torch to a great wrestler that's going to set the tone for and take wrestling into the future. Your Ring of Honor MVP, Roderick Strong. It just came off so great, and it's just a master. It's just an incredible match. It's even better than the Bryan Danielson match that Gibson had with Danielson. That's how good it is. At number 7, we have AJ Styles taking on Christopher Daniels. This is Against All Odds. A 30-minute Ironman match. AJ has to win it in overtime. Daniels puts on a great heel performance. But I'll tell you what, man, that Koji clutch with AJ, losing all the blood, it's really an iconic moment. It's one of the more iconic moments in TNA history. It's tough to pick between Against All Odds and Bound for Glory. I think in terms of the wrestling, in terms of, execution and just, things looking crisp and things looking better, the Bound for Glory match is really good as well. But I think the Against All Odds, there's a little bit more drama. It's bloody. It's a serious gut check for AJ as he wins in overtime. Number 6, we have AJ Styles, Petey Williams, Chris Sabin, the Ultimate X match from Final Resolution. It's just entertaining. It's probably the most entertaining match out of all of these, like just from an entertainment standpoint. But yeah, man, it's incredible stuff. It's not just one big bump. It's just a lot of consecutive, just good action. I think all of these guys were able to shine. But obviously you remember this for AJ almost breaking his neck. And, after Sabin drop kicks him as he's hanging from the cables. But yeah, there's some really good selling too. AJ was selling his, the broken fingers because, he was unable to climb. And, the ending is sick too. The ending, you could definitely the ending is really comparable to like a catch in football. that, you know, you actually have to go up the cables and grab the X, but AJ was able to just, you know, intercept it in midair. It really was incredible. It's the most entertaining match of the year still. It's not the best match of the year, but definitely arguably the most exciting match in TNA history. Still, number 5, we have Bryan Danielson taking on Roderick Strong from Vendetta. You know, this was definitely brutal stuff in terms of Roderick just dishing it out to Danielson, but Danielson really surviving Roderick for 48 minutes. It's one of the best performances of Daniel's career. The ending is sick too. You know, Danielson, that crucifix ending would have been dope. But, you know, Roderick is able to kick out of it, but Danielson is just relentless with the elbow blows to Roderick, so they have to stop the match. So it definitely sets up a rematch. But, yeah, I mean, this was tough. I had to go with this at number 5. At number 4, we have Joe versus Kobashi. Yeah, I mean, look, I think Kobashi coming in, you know, for that weekend was just huge. You know, the crowd was just incredible. It really was something that was never going to be duplicated. Just in terms of the crowd reaction, and the combination of Kobashi just annihilating Joe. I mean, Joe was able to hang with Kobashi, but this is really the only time where you just felt like Joe was like a severe underdog. But man, Kobashi with some of those, it's not just the chops, it's the variation of the back fist to the future chops. It's just like, yeah, he thought he was going to take Joe's head off. And I think Joe's promo at the end of this thing, it's tough to say, like, what's Joe's best promo ever. But in terms of, you know, something that's heartfelt, that might have been one of Joe's best promos ever. When he says, you know, like, for as messed up as I'm going to be because of matches like this, I'll know at the end of the day that I gave it all, you know, for the sport of professional wrestling. And number 3, we're going to go with Low Ki taking on Kenta. This was from Final Battle. It's just such a good combination. The pairing of Kenta and Low Ki is just a match made in heaven. They're just so similar. I mean, they make you like love wrestling. They make wrestling cool. It's as simple as that. There's a no-nonsense approach from both guys. The athleticism, the kicks, the combat skill, it's just another level. I mean, look, I wish we had gotten more of this version of Low Ki and Ring of Honor. This is Kenta's Ring of Honor debut, and it just felt like such a huge deal. And yeah, like Edison, like felt like a huge market at that time. Over the years, it didn't feel as special, you know, especially when they started running in the Manhattan Center. But yeah, Final Battle 2005. Low Ki and Kenta, I got that at number 3. At number 2, we have Kurt Angle, Shawn Michaels from WrestleMania 21. It felt like the biggest interpromotional match ever. It just was proof that the brand extension could be magical if you put the two guys together that just don't have any history with each other. It's just really weird. You know, the two of the best wrestlers ever have absolutely no history with each other, and they were able to make it work. And the chemistry was insane. You know, Jericho said one time that he felt like nobody ever got that much out of Angle. I don't know if that's a diss to Kurt Angle or whatever, but I don't know. But, you know, I always wanted to see these guys wrestle. You know, they've always had a reputation for being, you know, the two best workers, you know, two guys that can make anybody look good, you know, two guys that are just world-class athletes, performers. And yeah, I mean, it was awesome stuff. And I don't think Angle and Michaels gets enough credit for, you know, how much they drew, you know, for WrestleMania and even for Vengeance as well. The Vengeance match is still really good. I'm not a big of as a fan of that finish compared to this one. The finish was just so well done with Michaels, you know, and Michaels just made it exciting, you know, whether he's going to tap, whether he's not going to tap. It was like the most dramatic tap out ever. And then at number 1, we have AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, Christopher Daniels from Unbreakable. You know, this is where Christopher Daniels' magical X Division Championship reign ends. AJ's able to win him. He's able to reverse the Angel Wings into a backdrop bridge and win the X Division Championship. But this is just one of those rare occasions where just everything came together. This whole match from start to finish was just, you know, incredible. Look, I was not disappointed at all. I was shocked to see how, when this match happened in 2005 and going into 2006, I was shocked to see how many people were praising this match and voting for it. And, Unbreakable didn't really, a lot of people didn't even get to see it at the time. And still, there's so many people that were just so passionate about this match, and it wasn't that many people. Might have been like 15, maybe 22,000 at the most. But, the passion was able to penetrate to the masses. And when everybody knew about this match and when they finally saw it, it did not disappoint. This is what made me a huge fan of, I was already a TNA fan, but I think this is what really made me, a diehard TNA fan, at least at that time. AJ, Samoa Joe, Christopher Daniels, Unbreakable. There's enough has been said about this match. I can't do it justice, but yeah, I gotta say, I think this is the best match of 2005. It's very difficult. Like if you ask me what's, to pick between Unbreakable, Angle and Michaels, or Joe versus Kobashi, most people are going to say Joe versus Kobashi is the best Ring of Honor match. It actually did win in the voting for the top 100. I mean, it's going to win. It's going to win any Ring of Honor poll for 2005. I mean, it's as simple as that. But if you were to ask me what's the best match between those three, it really is tough. It's very difficult. And what's even tougher is to pick between Low-Ki and Kenta, Joe Kobashi, and then Bryan Danielson and Roderick. I had Roderick and Bryan Danielson at number one, when I did a Ring of Honor list a couple years ago for 2005. You could really flip a coin on it. It's very difficult, but yeah, let me know what you guys think of the list. And try. I mean, I know it's tough. I know it's very, very difficult. I tried not to be biased here. I just went with what I think was the absolute best match. But man, this was an incredible list, and probably the most difficult top five that I've ever had to try to rank.